So in this webinar over the next hour, we're going to talk about lots of different types of graphs you can create in JMP. And getting something basic, like a default kind of graphic of many, many, many different types of graphics is really easy in JMP. JMP is incredibly easy to get started with graphing, but I'm going to spend a little bit of time today, probably the majority of the time actually, showing you more details of how to edit those graphs and customize those graphs and special things you can do to those graphs. So some of the stuff I plan to cover with you guys during this hour are these examples that I'm going to skim through here, and then I'll show you how we would create these. So this first example is looking at, for the United States, the average household income across predicted by the percentage of vegetable consumption. This is a confusing variable. We'll look in the data table and see what that actually means, but the more people are consuming vegetables or reporting that they're consuming vegetables, it seems, the higher the household income in those states. So that's interesting. And we can call out some of these states. So like the state of New Jersey has an especially high income, but also pretty high vegetable consumption. We see their household income, average household income in New Jersey is $66,752, and their vegetable consumption is on the higher end of this scale. We see the state of Tennessee has rather similar vegetable consumption to New Jersey, but much lower household income. We see that the state of Oklahoma has very low vegetable consumption and household income at the lower end, but actually slightly above what would be predicted according to this regression line. So we'll be able to make a plot like this with a regression line where we put on things like the equation at the top, the R squared, these confidence bands and prediction bands, these call outs to the label information for these points, and we can apply a local data filter on the side so that we can, in real time, we can click on subsets, different regions of the data, for example, and we can update the graphic to include only the data that we're interested in. So we'll make a graph like this. We'll also look at making other simple graphics like a bar chart and applying graphlets inside of these. So essentially you can hover over a bar and see another sub-graph within it of another, either bars or another type of graphic inside. So the idea of hovering and seeing more information within a graph, we call this graphlets in JMP. And so I'll show you a simple way of creating these. If you want to learn more about them or make more complex versions of this, you can find lots of information on our website if you're looking up JMP and graphlets. We'll also talk briefly about how to create maps. Maps are very easy. It's very easy to create maps either with latitude and longitude data, or if you've got a column in your data set like the state name or the country name, you can really easily create a map like this. In this case, the United States is colored by those average household incomes. We'll switch to another data set and I'll show you some more details of things that you can customize using JMP's graph builder. So here I've put a reference range in the background. I've changed the point colors. I've changed font sizes and font types. I've nested one grouping variable within another grouping variable. So lots of ways we can customize a graphic. I'll show you how to create a 3D scatter plot. Apply some extra elements to it and even have this, we can have it spin in space and create a little video of that. We'll talk about more customization. So this is on the same, the second data set that we'll look at, which has this dissolution rate from a milling process. And so we'll look at taking data from fit Y by X output and making that into a graphic. So we'll look at some report information and then we'll save that data table in order to make graphics from that data table. So with custom intervals, and here again I've put some extra elements. I've customized this with grid lines in the background. I've put labels on here. I've put a grand mean reference line across the middle, and I've used custom standard error or custom intervals here for 95% confidence intervals. A couple last things, if we have time, we might look at a bubble plot to show a time element in a graph and how you can watch something over time, or customized maps. So like this is a layout of a building and how you can create anything you want. You can actually develop these sort of backgrounds for your specific mapping situation. So that's what I've got planned. I'm probably going to pause often for questions. So as I'm talking, if you've got a question about what we're talking about at that moment, type it into the chat. If you've got an overall question, if there's something that I'm not planning to cover that you'd like to see, I'll try to leave us some time at the end for those questions as well. So if you'd like to follow along and you have a copy of JMP, the examples I'm going to go through today are in the JMP sample data. So if you're in JMP, and I'll just open our first data set, which is this US demographics, you would get to this from the JMP menus, from the Help menu, Sample Data Library, and we've got lots of sample data sets here. And so if you scroll down alphabetically to US demographics, that's the data set that I have open here. So this US demographics data set has a row for each state. It has some demographic information about that state, the average household income, average IQ, the region, Southwest, Northeast, Midwest, and so on, the population, a score that has to do with 8th grade math competency, the percent of high school graduates, the gross state product, and this vegetable consumption that I looked at before. So if I hover over it, you can see there's a little bit of column information that says this is the percentage of residents who eat at least 5 servings of fruits and vegetables per day. So I feel that it's a little suspect. I wonder if people are being true in their survey of this, but this vegetable consumption is the percentage of residents who eat at least 5 servings of fruits and vegetables per day. If you've never used these column properties before, you can include all kinds of extra information about a column by double-clicking in that column and adding different column properties. So what we have here is a note, and that note lets us say more about what that variable means, so that's really helpful. You can also do things like value labels or value order. If you have something categorical and you want to make sure that the categories always show up in a certain order, if you click value order, you would see all of your categories and you'd have the opportunity to put them in the particular order you want. This is a continuous variable, so that's not as sensible here. So did I just apply? Yeah, I should remove that, shouldn't I? So I'll click this remove button. I just noticed there was an asterisk here indicating that I had something special going on. Now the asterisk went away. So you get little codes that tell you when there's special things happening with variables. You'll notice that in my data set, but not in yours, the state has this little yellow label next to it. This is so that when I hover over a point, I can see what state that point is. To make something a label, you would just click on the variable that you're interested in this columns list and right click, and there's this label unlabel. If I click it now, it takes the label off. If I click it again, it puts the label back on. This lets me, when I make a graph, hover over a point and see that the state name. So let's start making some graphs. I'll go to Graph and Graph Builder. This is the most flexible graphing tool in JMP. You can see there are a lot of other types of graphics that we could get as well, and we will look at a 3D scatter plot. We might look at a bubble plot later. But Graph Builder is super flexible and lets you do most of the graphics types of things that you might be interested in. So what we see when we open Graph Builder is this palette with these different drop zones. So we see a Y and an X. That should be immediately pretty familiar. We can also group things across the X, group them across the Y, wrap them around. There's a map shape spot down here that's going to help us with mapping or making maps. There's an overlay, a color, size, interval. So we see a page, frequency. We see lots of different drop zones. And as we start dragging things into those drop zones, so I'm going to use household income as my Y, you'll see that as I drag, it updates the graph. My points were all pale when I first clicked on this. Let me show you what that might have looked like. So here I have just one row selected. When I have just one row selected, you see that one in a dark blue and everything else pale. If I click anywhere in the white space, not on top of a point, but off of the points, it reselects everything. So I will do that often. But that's something, if you're a new user, that can be mystifying at first. You'll see things show up in that pale color, and the way to fix that is to click off and then reselect everything that way. You also see that the points are red and gray and blue, and that's unusual for a JMP data table to start with colors. We haven't given it a color element here. So I could color by something, like I could color by vegetable consumption. And they're, again, red, gray, and blue, although the red, gray, and blue should have changed a little bit because I don't think that's what they were colored by. I can change that color scale by double-clicking inside of the color legend and clicking the color theme and pick something different. For vegetable consumption, maybe I want them to be from white to green, where dark green is a lot of vegetable consumption. So now I'm coloring them from light to dark, but there's not a lot of differentiation, so I might want to change the scale of this. So if I go back to here, I can ask for example, the gradient or the transparency, or I can even apply a fill pattern here. I'm not too worried about these colors right now though, because I'm not actually going to color them by the vegetable consumption. I actually want, let's start over and let's get them colored again by their default colors. So let's put household income back into Y, and now they're back into that red, gray, blue. This is actually coming from these little dots back in the data table. These dots are called row states. And this data table already had a row state applied. So the points were already colored by one of the variables. If you wanted to apply something like this, you could pick a column and you could go to rows and you could say color or mark by column. So if you color or mark by that column, this will make a row state like this, blue to gray to red, the type that we have now. So you can apply this type of row state so that all of your plots will have the same coloring in them by default. Or if you want to get rid of this coloring, you can right-click above the rows. Again, it's like the white space where you're not on top of anything. This is an action button. This is an action button that shows you distributions. You want to be somewhere in this white space above the rows, and you right-click and you can say clear row states. When you do that, it takes away those colors, and you can see now the black dots that we would get from a data set that doesn't have row states applied. So we've got the household income on the y-axis. I can always take this, so my pointer is an arrow right now. As I hover over the axis, it's like a little Mickey Mouse glove, like a little white glove. And its orientation while I'm in the middle is this, like it's pointing to the left or to the right. When I'm up at the top, it's pointing up or down, or at the bottom is pointing down. So when it's at the middle orientation, I could click and I can drag, and it keeps the scale the same, but just changes the location of this axis. When it comes up to the corner, it stretches. So it's easy for me to make simple changes to the axis this way. I can also double click on the axis and make all kinds of changes. So here's where I could type in a minimum and maximum if I prefer. I could even put this on a log scale or a different scale instead of just the linear scale. If I've got, so right now I have currency, so by checking currency, it shows me that $sign. If I had brought new data in and wasn't calling it currency yet, I could add this format and call it currency in order to get those $signs. I get a little preview panel over here, so anything that I do to this axis, I could put ticks onto the axis. So this grid lines here, I could ask for major grid lines, and it's going to do them every increment of 5,000, or I could update that and have them be every increment of 10,000. And you'll see as I make these changes, it updates the preview. So it's showing me every 10,000, it's going to put a grid line. If I want to put some minor ticks in between, maybe I'll put one minor tick in between, then it would be at every 5,000 I'd get another tick. And I could put the actual full grid line across those ticks. So if I say OK, I've added grid lines to this, or I can double click my axis setting again and take the grid lines off. So double clicking on the axis gives me lots of opportunities to change things, or just dragging or recentering. Also, you can always grab the corner or the sides of the graph and resize the graph. So there's lots of stuff you can do just by dragging to update. But if you want more options, then double clicking or right clicking will give you those extra options. Okay, so right now we've got household income just with dots here in this axis. And we get this element on the side that's called the points, because that's what we've got shown right now is just points. And it gives us extra things we could do with those points if we wanted to. And you'll see that this points element corresponds to this spot in this ribbon at the top. So this is the element that we have right now showing. It just happened by default. We didn't choose it. It just makes sense when we've got one continuous variable. If we wanted to put something different onto the plot, like if I wanted to put a bar for the mean, I could drag it on top and have the points in the background and the bar. So now I get two little panels for elements to edit, the points element and the bar element. If I wanted to switch which one is in the front and which one is the back, I'm going to find that by right-clicking here. I'm going to see that the bar, I could say move backward. So now I have the points in the front and the bar in the back. or I could take the bar off again and just have the points. So there's all these different things I can choose one at a time, or dragging lots of things on top of my plot and put multiple elements. So right now I'm making a nonsense graphic, but I'm just showing you that you're able to grab as many of these elements as you want. There's an undo button if I need to take a step backwards. And there's a start over button if I want to just have a clean slate and completely start over. So here I am back with just household income, just the original dots. And now I want to look at the relationship with vegetable consumption acting sort of as a predictor of household income. Now, this is a great moment to remind you that in statistics, correlation does not imply causation. And even when there is a relationship, you don't really know what might be driving something else. So it could be the case that in states that have a higher household income, they're able to purchase more fresh vegetables. And so maybe I have this relationship backwards, but this is the plot that I'm going to create right now. So you'll see when I put vegetable consumption here and household income here, now I have a scatter plot. And so it's still showing me the points, but now it's in a scatter plot type of situation. And some of the elements I might want to add to this, I could add the smoother. That gives me a smoothed line. The smoother has extra stuff I could do with it, like I could make it less smoothed and it gets closer and closer to just a regression line, or I could make it more wobbly. So I'm increasing the overfit of this smoother to the data. I can ask for a confidence band around that smoother. So this is a 95% confidence band for the mean according to this fit. So there's really cool stuff I could do with the smoother, but maybe I'd rather a more traditional statistical approach, and I'd like to put a line of fit. The line of fit is a typical regression line. It tells me right now I'm using this polynomial type with a linear relationship. I could try a quadratic relationship. So now it gives me sort of a U shape slightly, or I could try a cubic relationship. Now it gives me like an S shape kind of. It gives me the confidence band with that. I could ask for the prediction band as well. I could ask for it to print the equation at the top and the R squared. Now, when I created this plot to show you in the graphic at the beginning, I used the straight line linear fit, and I used that confidence band for the mean. For the predicted value, I put the Y equation here and the R squared. So the equation, the R squared are the same, but I would need to go back to the linear fit here. The other options besides polynomial are a robust Cauchy. This is going to downweight outliers. So it's like a regression, but with downweight de-emphasizing the outliers. And a time series is another option. So if you have time series data, this is really great. That's not going to be applicable in my situation. So here I am with something very similar to the final plot. I can add these callouts, and I can also add a filter, and we'll see how that works. So let's click the Done button to get rid of that control panel. So this looks a little simpler now. To get the control panel back, I go to the red triangle Show Control Panel that was at the top, or I click Done to get rid of the control panel. So that control panel is this very top thing. I also have this legend. I can change where the legend is sitting. I could put it inside the plot or leave it where it is on the right. I can go to the legend settings here, or I can click when I have the control panel open. I can click on these guys and I'll see the legend settings. So if I want to not include one or both of those pieces, I can uncheck them from this list and say okay, and so then my legend is gone. So there's multiple ways for me to get rid of that sort of redundant information on the side. And from the top red triangle, that's also where I will find this local data filter. So you'll see there's lots of things going on here. This show and hide control panel, that's really helpful. Some of this stuff about the legend is really helpful. You'll find more and more options the more you want to customize, but really it's the things on the top to focus on at the beginning and the things on the bottom. So the local data filter, I could filter, for example, by region. That's what I did over here. So I choose the thing I want to filter on. I click the plus sign. And now I can update this plot to just show the Midwest, or just show the Northeast, or just the South, or just the West. And notice the equation and the R squared change. Everything updates when I choose something. I can also choose multiple groups. So this is the whole country except for the West. And it's showing me on the side how many states are in each of these regions. So I'm seeing the sample size on this side. So if I choose all 4 regions, then I'm back to that the original plot, and now I could add these callouts. The data set, when we first open it, doesn't have this label. So the first thing I see when I hover over something is it tells me it's row number 36 with this vegetable consumption and this household income. If I want it to say the state name instead of the row number, that's when I come back to the data table, I right-click, and I ask something to be a label. So now that that's a label, now I don't see row 36, I see that the state is Oklahoma. That's what's so great about these labels. And the labels can actually even be images. You can have images in JMP data tables. Let's really quickly look at, in the sample data library, there's a data set called Big Class Families. And here you can see there's images in the data table. And if we build a linear regression like the one I built, the image itself can be a label, so you can actually have images used as labels. You can also use those images as the plotting character. So instead of the little points in the background, I could ask for the image, the picture, to be the marker. So instead of choosing it as label, I choose use for marker. And now it's the little people's faces that are the actual marker in the plot. So there are many really cool things we can do with images in JMP as well. So here I've added just the text information about this is Oklahoma. I scroll out here to where this little pin is. I click the pin, and now that is pinned, and I can drag it around, and it still keeps this little line pointing back to that point. And I think New Jersey was another one that I pinned. If I move that somewhere better in the plot, and maybe it was, yeah, Tennessee was the other one that I pinned. So this is basically the plot that I created before with slightly different dimensions, so I might drag this to be a little skinnier. And here's my plot. So the filtering is a really great tool. Anything that you're doing in Graph Builder, you can always use the red triangle, and then the local data filter will be here, and you can add a data filter. If we had added a data filter on, let's remove this one, and let's add a data filter on something continuous, like IQ. This would allow us to take a slider, so we're only looking at the high IQ states. Or we can click where the numbers are and say I want all the IQs 100 or above, or I want the inverse of that, so I could switch to just the opposite of what I've selected. So that's the high IQs, that's the low IQs. So it's easy to use these filters either on continuous or on categorical data. So that's the first big example, our big intro to using Graph Builder in JMP. So I'm going to pause here if there are specific questions about this example or something else you want to see while we're in this data set.
Thanks, Ruth. Thus far, no questions. Just a reminder, if you do have any questions as we're going along, feel free to enter them in the chat or the Q&A section, and we'll be happy to get them answered as we can.
Great. So I'll still stay in this data set. If you've got other questions, type them in the chat, and Chuck can interrupt me, or I'll pause for questions again in a little bit. Another thing I wanted to show you was the idea of creating a graph with another graph hovered inside of it. So instead of just hovering and seeing label information, to see a graph as a piece of the label. So to create something like this, we can go back to Graph Builder. And I created a bar chart in this case for household income across the regions. So again, I have household income as the Y. I have the regions on the X. Now we've put something categorical onto the X. And perhaps you've used JMP before and you know this, or perhaps you've noticed this as we've been using it, but there are little icons on the side of the column names. These blue triangles indicate this is something continuous, that it's a measurement, a numeric measurement that's continuous in nature. The red bar icon is indicating that this is a categorical variable, that it's got some kind of a name as its representation. So Midwest, Northeast, Southwest, not numeric data that we could treat as continuous. So we see different options, or different things will happen with these different types of variables in JMP. In this case, this would have given us a scatter plot when we used something continuous on this axis, so I could replace it and put IQ. Here we see something like a scatter plot, maybe a best fit line. When we put region on, whoops, I'm trying to replace that. we see something different. I have the best fit line on, and it can't make a line like a regression line. So instead, it just puts the mean at each group and a confidence band instead. So that may be the element that I'd like to look at, or maybe I'd prefer to look at something like a box plot. Maybe I would prefer, instead of a box plot, to look at, maybe a bar chart. So I think this was, yeah, this is in the direction of what I built before. So right now I have the points in the background and the bars in the front. Again, if I wanted to switch that, I could ask the bar to move backward and I could show all the points on the front. Or maybe I don't want the points at all. With the bars, I can do things like I can have the bar represent the mean of that group, or it could represent the median of that group, or it could represent any of these other statistics, even the sample size of the group instead. So here we're just seeing how many were in each group. It really doesn't correspond to the household income. I'll go back to the mean here. We can ask for error bars, so we could put the entire range. What did I choose there? There's the entire range, so from the minimum to the maximum household income in each region. Or I could ask for the interquartile range, the middle 50%. Or I could ask for just one standard error. That's a very common plot. And when you choose something for the error interval, it tells you at the bottom of a plot what that corresponded to. So each error bar is constructed using one standard error from the mean. Another option is just a confidence interval. So this is the 95% confidence interval on the mean. And then to add the hover plot, we can, so right now when I hover on one of these bars, I see the states that make up that bar, or at least the first few of them. I see what the region name is, and I see what that average household income is. If I right click on this, I can ask for the hover label to be any of these things. So for example, I could ask it to be a box plot. Now when I hover over one of the bars, I see a box plot for the data that makes up that bar. So the household income just for that south region, or here the household income just for the northeast region. Instead of box plots, I could right click and I could ask that hover label to be a, let's make that a bar just like the original graph is. So now when I hover, I see that bar chart instead. Okay, so this was an, yes.
I'm sorry, real quick, Ruth, as soon as I kicked it back to you, I did have a couple of questions come in. Is now a good time to?
Yes, yeah, it's great.
So while we're on the same data set here, how did you label by state again?
Yeah, great question. So that's when you are in the data table itself on the column list, anything you want to use as a label, I could add region as a label now. I can right click on it and there's this label unlabel. So when I choose that, it adds this little label. So I know now state and region will be in the label. Now when I hover over something using that data set, it tells me the state and the region and any other data that is in that plot. So it shows me the household income also, because that's part of the plot.
Awesome. And then if you produced a histogram of household income, how would you produce a vertical frequency axis?
So if we just wanted a histogram, Graph Builder may not be the right tool. It could be. We could use this. So we could use, right now I've got this grouped by the regions. And by the way, there's some fun ways we can represent this in polygons or in kernel density estimates. Yeah, so that we can have them overlap each other more so they start looking like little mountains in front of each other. So lots of flexibility here. If I took region back off the plot, and I put this back into a bar, here is a distribution, and I still have that hover graph as well. So within each bar, I can see the particular states that made up that bar. So we can build histograms here in Graph Builder, but an easier place to build a histogram is actually under the distribution, under Analyze Distribution. So when we go to Analyze Distribution, if we look at household income, if we want a distribution of household income, we see that same information. And here we have the option to ask for it to be a horizontal layout, for example. So very easily we can switch things. we still have the same capabilities for customization. So I still can right-click and see the axis settings, and I can add grid lines. So I can still customize this as well, but this distribution platform might actually be the better place to go if you just wanted a histogram of the data. Likewise, I can change the bin sizes really easily here, and one way to do that is to use this hand grabber tool and click. Whoops, I just clicked on the axis settings instead. And when I scroll up or scroll down, it makes bigger and bigger bins, or it makes smaller and smaller bins. So that's one way, just with that hand grabber tool, to change the bin size, or I can right click in the axis settings and I can ask for different measurements. So there are a lot of ways to customize this, but I think that's probably the easiest way to customize a distribution, is actually using the distribution output. If I didn't fully answer that question, please feel free to ask again with more detail. And if anyone has any other questions on this data set, now is a great time.
Last one real quick. Could you do a moving average for the same plot and fit the regression?
You could. How would you do it? I don't think you can do it so easily in Graph Builder. Let me think about, so if you wanted a moving average, we'd really need that. It doesn't really make sense to have a moving average in this data set where we would just be averaging alphabetically one state with the next, but it would really make sense if we had a time element. So if our data set was measured one time, the next time, the next time, and the next time, then a moving average might make sense. There are easy formulas that you can create in the data table by going to, for example, new formula column, and I think, yeah, the moving average is one of these row operations. So I could make a moving average with whatever weighting I'm looking for, maybe linear weighting, whatever I want here. I'll just say OK. And so here's my moving average column. So probably what I'd want to do is use that moving average column now in my distribution. I'm not positive what graphic we would want here, because again, it doesn't really make sense in this data table. It would make more sense when we have a time element. But yes, you can certainly make a graphic using a moving average. Probably the easiest way is creating the moving average as a separate column in the data set. But if you've got something time series, you could have, let's start over and let's go back to our graphic of household income with the vegetable consumption. Where did jump go? What just happened? So it looks like I closed a whole bunch of things. Several programs just shut, including jump. But we'll just open the last data table. So file open recent will take us to this US demographics. And we'll rebuild this graph. So graph builder. And we want household income as the response. We want vegetable consumption as the X, and some kind of a regression. And here, if this were something where it made sense to do a moving average in a time series sort of context, we could choose a time series and we could at least graph a forecast model where we specify the seasonal periods and forecast periods. But again, I think probably the easiest way to actually graph something with a moving average is to create the moving average variable. Again, that was right-click on the variable, new formula column, and that was hiding in this row group that the moving average was an option. Any other questions on this data set? Things we've looked at so far.
I think we're good if we want to just keep moving.
Super. So then the last thing I want to show you on this data set is we have this column called state name. We can actually make a map out of this data set. So let me clear up a few windows and go back to Graph and Graph Builder. And this is where we can use this map shape. So if I grab the state name and put it into map shape, I get a map. Now the map is already colored because, again, I had these row states. But if I clear the row states, then this is what the map would look like if I had no row states applied. It just shows me a map. So it shows the map of all the states. All you need for JMP to be able to do this is a column that's got something that it recognizes inside the column. You can call the column anything you want. You could call this supercalifragilistic expialidocious, whatever. It doesn't matter what the name of the column is, it just matters that it scans the column and sees something it recognizes as a map. So this works. And then we can color it by something, like we could color it by vegetable consumption. So I can either drag it on top for the color or drag it over here to this color section. And then again, I might want to click on this or double click on this to choose a different color theme, like maybe I want this color theme. So California eats a lot of vegetables. I live in Florida. Florida is moderate for vegetable consumption, according to this. Tennessee is pretty high considering the area around it. So creating maps is really easy as well. Let me show you one more time that local data filter. The map will also update with local data filter. So if we put on the region, for example, I can have a map just of the Midwest or the Northeast or the South or the West or some combination of these. Or if I, instead of this type of local data filter, if I want to do it for something continuous, I can ask local data filter, and I could put something like, let's do this for the household income, and let's only look at home or states with high household income, or let's look at middle household income or low household income. So these local data filters are really cool for every type of map or analysis that you're using. Okay, you can also create maps from latitude, longitude. There is latitude, longitude in this data set at the end. So we could go back to Graph and Graph Builder, and we could choose latitude and longitude and drag them in the middle. And you see that there's a smooth line trying to fit these points, but that doesn't make any sense. The points are actually, there's Alaska, there's Hawaii, and these are the midpoints of these states. So this is not actually the right kind of data for this, but you can create this map. You obviously want a background map in this case. So to get that, you right click, you say Graph Background Map, and then you ask for a street map service if you have something on the local level, or simple or detailed earth for something on a larger scale. So here we have a simple earth in the background, and we see the midpoints of all these states. Again, we can click done. We can rescale things. We can drag down or up, or whatever we need to do to customize that. Okay, I'm going to close this data set now, and we're going to look at a couple other things. We're going to look at a little bit more detail about, again, customizing a kind of typical graphic. This is a very common type of graphic that we might want to see as a box plot, maybe with the points on top of it for some kind of distribution across several variables. So let's look at that. And for this, we're going to use the data set. It's also in the sample data set, and it's called tablet production. So tablet production, I've opened the wrong one. I saved this twice. Tablet production.jump, this one. Tablet production will look like this when you open it. It again has a row state applied. So when we start plotting, we're going to see these plotting characters. If I want to get rid of that, I can right click and say clear row states. I can go to Graph Builder, and what we have here in this data set is a milling process, and we know some information about the milling process, like the mill time, and that's the most interesting response right now for us. So here's our mill times, and the mill times are dependent on several other variables, including some of these continuous variables like the blend time and the blend speed, and also some categorical variables. The screen size, it turns out, if you explore this data set, is incredibly important to the milling process. So we could grab screen size first and maybe put some box plots on top of this. And what else might we want to do? Let's look at maybe, I think I had the talc supplier and the sugar supplier also in this plot before. So if we take the talc supplier, if I want to include two categorical variables on the bottom, I have lots of ways of nesting them. So if I drag this down here, you see extra zones appearing. And as I'm hovering in different spots, you see what happens. If I replace it in the middle, it just totally replaces it. It takes out my screen size and replaces it with talc supplier. If I put the talc supplier above, It puts the talc supplier as the inside of the nest and nests it within screen size. If I put it below, it does the opposite. So below is what I did before, where it's got the rough and smooth talc supplier, and within that, the 3 screen sizes. And then I also added sugar supplier in my other plot. So I can look at splitting it out by color. I could overlay them. Laying them puts them right next to each other. Sometimes overlay is what we're looking for. Here I actually did it as a group X. So I split it into 2 panels, the sour and the sweet. And then I chose for the box plot some style elements. I think I chose for this to be an outlier box plot and for the style to be solid. So the solid style makes it this solid color, but then I changed the color. Coming over here, I right click and I can make the fill color, for example, be something different. I didn't quite hit the same pretty purple that I had before, so let's try this again. I chose something special before, so let's maybe double click on the settings, and that should give me more options. If I go to the color themes, I think I was using this white to purple color theme before, so let's try that and see what happens there. That's the same purple color that I chose before. Now I also wanted to get the points on the front of this. So again, we right click in the back and we ask the points to move forward or the box plots to move backwards. So I right click, choose points move forward, or else box plot move backwards. But I don't want the points to be white. So here I can come over to the mill time, and I think I want to color them differently by sweet and sour. So if I take the sugar supplier for the color, now I get 2 different colors for sweet and sour, but I don't like the colors, so I'll right click on them. The color for the sweet, I think I had a pretty bright purple, maybe something like this. And the color for the sour, I believe I had like a pinkish color before. So something like this. I'm getting pretty close to what that plot looked like. I don't need all of these pieces in this legend. So again, I can double click on the legend and I don't need these things to show. I don't need this guy to show. Just those 2 will be sufficient. And then I can add that reference range. So I'm getting really close to the plot that I created before. So this is again going to be with the axis. So I double click on the axis and I can add a value, just 1 line. So if I wanted a reference line at, say, 20, and maybe I want that line to be red and a little bit thicker, and I want that line to say reference, I can add, and when I go back to my plot, I get a reference line. So that's one option. What I actually wanted to do here was to put a reference range in. So I can double click on this, and instead of the line, which I'll remove, I'll put a range, so I'm checking this range, where I'm going to go from 15 to 25. I'll call that reference range. I'll make it green. That seems darker green than the one I chose before. Positive, which one? That's getting closer, I don't know, something like that. Nope, too light. Well, we'll use it. So I'll say OK, and so then I have this reference range. So again, I click done and maybe resize this. And this is getting close to the plot that I created before. Again, I chose colors a little bit differently. I also actually changed the fonts from the previous plot. To change fonts, I can right click on top of words and I can see font color, rotate text, bullet point, all kinds of things here. So if I want to change the font, I click the font and I choose something different. I chose this weird font before. It wasn't an improvement, but that's how you change the font. You can also double click to get inside of this to make a text change. So maybe I want to call this mill time. Maybe I just want mill time at the top. Maybe that's all I want. So I can delete the rest of this. And now it just says mill time as the title of my plot. Again, everything I right click to get the options to edit things. I think for the legend, I need to go into the legend settings and there's a font button here. And so I could choose my font again and say OK. So that changed the font there. Down here, I also right click everywhere that I want to change it. I right click and choose the font option. Okay, so that's probably enough of the details of editing plots. Again, with grid lines, so something like this, if I wanted to create this dissolution plot, to add grid lines, I'm just clicking in this, I'm choosing this grid lines, and I'm choosing how frequently to do them, and I'm viewing what the change is over here. Okay, so there's one other thing I do want to show you that I find really useful, and that is sometimes your original data set is not what you want to create your plot for. You actually want to use something that you've done in an analysis. So here's an analysis of, it's in the Save Script one way here. If you click that, you'll get the same thing I have. This is an ANOVA, a one-way ANOVA analysis of this dissolution by screen size. So we can see that this particular response, the screen size is very impactful on this particular response. The levels for this response are 3, 4, and 5. And we see things like a table of quantiles, a table of means and standard deviations, the means comparisons, and so on. If I wanted to take something in the output, like this table of means and standard deviations and standard errors, and build a plot from this, it's really easy to do. I just right-click on this data table, and I say make into data table. So somewhere on that output that's in a table style, I just right-click, I say make into data table, and now I have a little data table that I can manipulate. So if I go to Graph Builder with this data table, I can take the mean into the response. I can split it over the levels. The level is not actually the name I want. This was the screen size, I think, so I might want to call these screen size. And I can actually use this interval to put in custom intervals. So for example, the lower and upper 95% for the confidence interval, I can drag them together into this interval spot, and it creates my error bar from those custom interval values. So it's really easy to create this. This is incredibly important if you are doing something where you're getting LSMeans, the least squares means from an analysis. Those are not always identical to the actual mean. So if you get a table of LSMeans and their standard errors, it's really easy to just right-click that table, say to make into a data table, and then use Graph Builder with this dragging there. You could, instead of using the lower and upper, we could instead use a standard error of the mean to create those. So this is plus and minus 1 standard error. So you can either use the confidence limits or you can just use 1 standard error up and down. Really easy to create this. And maybe we want to connect these with a line, and maybe we want to add grid lines, maybe every 5, and then little grid lines in between. And maybe we want to put a reference line on that plot. Whatever we would want to do here, we can add all those features again. So I find that really helpful. I wanted to mention that in this webinar because of how often I use it. Sometimes you're trying to plot something that wasn't in your original data table, but instead is a result that you're getting from one of these processes. Really easy to make this into data by right-clicking, make into data table. Okay. Any questions here? After this, I'm going to show you kind of specialized plots for the last few minutes and then take any extra questions.
Hey, Ruth, just one or two real quick. So with latitude and longitude, are the data format in degrees and decimal degrees or degree, minutes, seconds?
I believe that you can use a lot of different formats. Let's look back at what the data were in that particular data file. So that was demographics, and here we had so it was a decimal number that was being coded as degrees. Let's look back at this data table. So it was, the format was latitude DDD. So for geographic data, we have, these are the ways we understand or can take in data and have it appear with the correct degree notation. So in this case, 3 formats for latitude, and this particular one was in this format.
Great, thanks, Ruth. Can you change the orientation of the reference range statement?
I believe you can. Good question. I'm not positive how to do that yet. I guess we're going to have to recreate a plot. Graph builder. And maybe yeah, I think we had mealtime and we had at least screen size. I'll just do this. And then we'll put maybe box plots, and we'll make those box plots in that solid style again, and that's enough. Okay, so then I can add on this axis a reference value, maybe at 20. And I forgot to put a label for it. So we'll label it reference. And let's see if we can change the orientation. So if I right click on it, I get axis settings. I think I might actually just be on the axis. Good question. I'm not sure if you can do that. Really good question. If anyone else listening knows, let us know. What I would suggest when you run into something that you don't have an answer for and you can't quickly find an answer for, if you send your question either to the user community, that's probably the fastest place to get a reply. You can get to the user community through the help menu, which will launch you right to our, where is it? Jump on the web? Yeah, Jump user community right here. That will take you there, or it's just community.jump.com. So if you go to community.jump.com, you can post your questions here. So that's probably the fastest place to get answers. I think our community has an average response rate of 2 hours. That's not necessarily to the correct answer, but that's the first post that somebody will kind of offer you some help. Another way that you can get help is by sending a question to our tech support, which is support@jump.com. So if you do find that you aren't sure what the answer, like I don't know how to change the orientation of that reference, you could send that question either to the community or to support@jump.com.
Great, thanks, Ruth.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so a couple other things that I think are cool that I want you to know about. From the graph menu, we spent most of our time in Graph Builder. Really flexible. You can build so many different things. You can, so this ribbon of all these different types of variables, some of them work better with different types of variable types. So if I put other types in here, I can try some of these, like a Mosaic plot to show me the distribution of something categorical across something categorical. If I've got something where I want a heat map is an option here as well. And another cool thing we can do is we can take a whole bunch of variables, put them into X, and choose a parallel plot. So a parallel plot can be really helpful for understanding the trends of some of the observations are high on all of these things, and then they go a little bit low, and then they go a little bit high. So you can, this is again interactive like everything in Jumps, you can sort of follow these paths. So parallel plots are cool. So lots of stuff in here, but also below Graph Builder in the graph menu, bubble plots let you put in a time element. And so that's pretty cool. And 3D scatter plots are really cool. So let's look at the 3D scatter plot. I think I used mill time, blend time, and maybe dissolution rate last time. Maybe these. So I need to choose at least 3 things. It will only show me 3 at a time, but if I choose more than 3, it will just let me choose which 3 to look at. And so here's my scatter plot. The default is pretty small points. So I might want to make those points larger, so I right click. This one in the settings is where I will find this marker size, so I can make them bigger. And right now you can see it has 4 that are really large. That's because I've got 4 things selected in the data table, so I'll just click off of them so they're not large anymore. Another cool thing that I can do here is from the top red triangle, I could do something like add these contour ellipsoids. And I know that dissolution rate has something to do, so I'll group them. Oops, no, I'm sorry. I know that screen size has something to do with that dissolution rate. So I'll group them by screen size. So now there's my 3 little ellipsoids for the 3 screen sizes. And then another thing I can do is if I hit the Shift key and start scrolling, it will just spin for me. So I just hit the Shift key, start scrolling, and then it spins. And if I do this a little bit slower, So I'll hit the Shift key and spin it slower. That's better. You can now hit screen record on software on your computer and have a video of your 3D scatter plot. So that's another really cool one. There are a couple things that you can create in Graph Builder that you can also, if you're using Windows, not Mac, so I can't show you this because I'm doing this on Mac, but some of the things you build in Graph Builder you can also create as GIFs. So if there is a time element. So let's see, was there anything else special? Let's look at the time element in bubble plots. So for this, I'm going to use a data set called SAT by year. This data set has a time element in it, so it has each state followed for 8 years. And so in this case, we can use a bubble plot, and I'll just use the saved script right now in the middle. So this is a bubble plot looking across time at the average SAT scores, so standardized testing for high school students on their math and their verbal abilities averaged over these different regions or within the regions, the different states. So we can look at it over time and see how everybody changes. I live in the South. I live in Florida, so I'm particularly interested in how the South is behaving. So I can hone in on the South. I can speed it up if I want it to go a little bit faster, or I can slow it down if I want it to go slower. I can make the bubbles larger if that's easier to watch, or smaller. And I can also split out what's making up one of these bubbles. So I can see that the South actually has 2 clusters in it. One cluster that has lower math and verbal scores on the SAT and one cluster that has larger. This is a really interesting example. The reason that we're seeing this is actually because of a selection bias. So there's lower scores on average in states that kind of require everyone or many people to take that test. So these states, Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, South Carolina, many students take the SAT in these states, so the averages are a little lower. In these states, only the students that are planning to go to maybe Ivy League schools or schools in the states where these tests are required, there's a selection bias. Only the more academically inclined students are taking that test. So that's why we see higher averages. So interesting. So again, if you're doing this on a Windows machine, you'll actually have an option to save this as a GIF. If you're using Mac like me, you can always screen capture and save these interactive things that way as well. Okay, so we're reaching the end of the hour. I think there are so many cool tools that you can use in JMP for making graphics that are exactly the way you want them to be, to customize them to look and feel like the publication quality graphics that you're looking for. But easy to get default things in JMP, and then some of these extra special things take a little more knowledge. So the tips that I have for you are right-clicking and double-clicking. All those extra things, like if you want to do something on the axis, that was double-clicking on the axis, or right-clicking in the middle of the plot. I can change the color of the background. I can customize the background, change transparency, change the marker size, change the marker type, the borders, all kinds of things. So right-clicking, double-clicking. Those are kind of the secrets to getting more advanced at customizing your graphics. And I hope that if you have questions, you'll either send me emails or you'll reach out to our JMP user community. That was community.jmp.com, or even send questions to our tech support. So let me write. This is, I think, going to be tiny, but my email address is ruth.hummel@jmp.com. You're welcome to send me questions if you have any, and you can also interact with other users at community.jmp.com, our user community. You can search for questions that might have already been answered or post your own there.
Hey, Ruth, one last question that came up. I know we're right at the time limit, but on that bubble chart there, how did you include the time attribute in the bubble chart?
Yeah, great question. So I didn't actually show you how to make that plot. I just showed you the result. Where did my data set go? So that was our SAT by year. To get this plot, you go to the graph menu and there's a special bubble plot element. And so here's where you can put the time in. So what do you want on the y-axis? I had one of my SAT scores. So I think it was verbal that I put on y, math that I put on x. The ID was the actual state. The time element is the year. And I sized them by the percent that we're taking, I think in 2004. So the size is an optional element, but that was helpful. In the ID, I also had the region so that I could split them out. So I had state and region, and you can color them by something as well. And so then when I hit OK, then I see this is looking at all of the states together. So yeah, there's a special under the graph menu bubble plot that has that special time spot.
Great, thanks, Ruth. So I just want to take a second to thank everybody for joining. We had lots of great questions today, and the window for me to see all the questions is really small. So if we inadvertently skipped a question, as Ruth mentioned, feel free to send an email or post the question on community.jump.com. We also have an academic mailbox. It's academic@jmp.com. That is monitored by several folks. So any of the 3 methods that Ruth has put up on the screen now are great ways to get questions answered.
Yep, and as Chuck said, thank you so much for attending today. We really enjoy having you guys interact with us, and we welcome your questions, so do reach out if there's anything else we can help you with. And have a great day.